My name is Margaret Wilson. For 40 years, I lived in the same modest home on Lakeside Drive in Evergreen Estates. It's not much, just 1,100 square feet with faded blue paint, a small porch, and a garden I tend myself. My car? A 1998 Toyota Corolla that makes a funny noise when it starts, but has never failed me once. I'm 68 years old now, and for most of my adult life, I've been the neighborhood joke. Poor Margaret, they'd whisper. Still driving that death trap. Did you see her patching her own roof again? She must be broke. She's wearing the same dress from last Christmas. What my neighbors never understood was that every decision I made was deliberate. Every penny I saved was purposeful. And yesterday, when I purchased all 7 of their foreclosed homes at auction, I finally revealed what 40 years of patience and financial discipline can accomplish. This is my story. I moved to Evergreen Estates in 1985. I was 28 years old, recently divorced, and working as an accountant at a local firm. The neighborhood was new then, modest homes for middle-class families. My neighbors and I were all starting out, all in similar financial situations. My ex-husband had left me with nothing but debt and a broken heart. I promised myself 2 things. I would never depend on anyone else again, and I would never be financially vulnerable. The first few years, everyone was friendly. We had block parties, shared gardening tips, and helped each other move furniture. Sarah and David Johnson next door had a little boy named Tyler who would help me weed my garden sometimes. The Garcias across the street would bring me homemade tamales at Christmas. Things changed around 1990. The tech industry boomed, and suddenly my neighbors were getting promotions, changing jobs, making more money. One by one, they began renovating their homes, adding second stories, fancy landscaping, 3-car garages. I remained in my small blue house, driving my old car, bringing homemade lunches to work. The first comment came from Rebecca Miller during a neighborhood barbecue. "Margaret, when are you going to upgrade that tiny kitchen of yours? We just put in granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. I could give you our contractor's number." I just smiled and said, "My kitchen works just fine for me, thanks." That's when I noticed the look, that mixture of pity and superiority that would become so familiar over the next decades. What my neighbors didn't know was that I was following a careful financial plan. My accounting background gave me insight into how money could grow over time. Every month, I put 50% of my income into diverse investments. Index funds that tracked the overall market, real estate investment trusts, dividend-paying stocks from stable companies, municipal bonds for tax-free income, and a small percentage in high-risk, high-reward investments. I lived on a strict budget. My mortgage payment was low. I had put down 20% and chosen a 15-year fixed rate. I packed lunches instead of eating out. I shopped sales and used coupons. I kept my house well-maintained to avoid costly repairs. Each time I got a raise, I didn't change my lifestyle. The extra money went straight into investments. By 1995, I had paid off my mortgage completely. Nobody knew, I never mentioned it. Instead of spending more, I redirected that mortgage payment into my investment accounts. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, I had enough cash reserves to buy stocks at bargain prices. When the housing market crashed in 2008, I purchased 2 rental properties in an up-and-coming neighborhood that has since tripled in value. All this time, the changes in Evergreen Estates were dramatic. Original homes were torn down and replaced with mini-mansions. Luxury cars filled driveways. My neighbors installed swimming pools, tennis courts, and home theaters. And the whispers grew louder. The Johnson family next door had grown wealthy through David's software company. They tore down their original home and built a 5,000-square-foot modern monstrosity that loomed over my small house. Sarah Johnson stopped by one afternoon while I was hanging laundry on my clothesline. Another way I saved money and energy. "Margaret, David and I were talking," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We'd be happy to help you financially if you're struggling. We know times must be tough on a secretary's salary." I had been promoted to CFO of my firm 5 years earlier, but I never discussed my career with the neighbors. "That's very kind," I said, "but I'm doing just fine." She looked skeptically at my clothesline. "Well, at least let us give you our old washer and dryer when we upgrade next month. That clothesline is bringing down property values." I declined politely, but the interaction stung. It was the first time I realized that my neighbors didn't just pity me, they looked down on me. The Garcias had moved away years ago, replaced by the Andersons who worked in finance. Victoria Anderson organized an annual Christmas party that grew more lavish each year. In 2010, she rang my doorbell with an invitation. "We're asking for a $100 contribution for the party fund," she explained. "But don't worry if that's too much for you. You can help in other ways, like serving drinks or cleaning up afterward." The assumption that I couldn't afford $100 was insulting enough, but the suggestion that I should work as their server was worse. I declined the invitation entirely. That was the beginning of my systematic exclusion from neighborhood events. By 2015, the social dynamic was clear. I was the neighborhood charity case, the cautionary tale, the topic of gossip at their fancy dinner parties. The Miller children would walk by my house and point at my old car. "My dad says only poor people drive cars that old," I overheard one say to the other. When I continued working past retirement age, rumors spread that I couldn't afford to retire. In reality, I loved my job, and the company had asked me to stay on with reduced hours and excellent compensation. One particularly hurtful moment came during the neighborhood's 30th anniversary celebration in 2015. They organized it at the country club where many of them were members. I arrived in my usual simple clothes to find everyone in formal wear. As I entered, conversation stopped. Rebecca Miller came over with a glass of champagne. "Margaret, we didn't think you'd come. You never RSVP'd." This was a lie. I had responded to the email invitation promptly. "Don't worry about the ticket price," she whispered, patting my arm. "We all chipped in to cover you." I thanked her, knowing full well that the $200 ticket price was insignificant to me, but they had decided I couldn't afford it. I stayed for 30 minutes, then left quietly. Nobody noticed. That night, I checked my investment portfolio. It had crossed the $5 million mark. I allowed myself a small smile, then went back to reading my library book. The first signs of trouble came in late 2022. The housing market had been overheated for years, with my neighbors taking out second and third mortgages to fund their lavish lifestyles. Interest rates began to rise. The stock market became volatile. I recognized the warning signs from my years in finance and began to liquidate some investments, building up my cash reserves. I moved money into safer, more stable investments and prepared for what I believed was coming. At neighborhood gatherings, I occasionally mentioned my concerns about the economy. My comments were met with dismissive laughter. "Always the worrier, aren't you, Margaret?" David Johnson said at a block party. "The market's never been stronger. Just last month, we put in a new infinity pool. Want to come over for a swim sometime? Might be your only chance to try one." Everyone laughed. Tyler Johnson, now in his 30s and working at his father's company, added, "Dad's right. People who understand finance aren't worried. That's why some people get ahead and others, well, you know." He glanced meaningfully at my home. I smiled and changed the subject. There was no point in arguing. By early 2024, the signs were unmistakable. Major tech companies began massive layoffs. The housing market cooled dramatically. The stock market entered correction territory. I watched as the panic slowly set in around the neighborhood. The Andersons' finance jobs were eliminated. The Johnsons' software company lost major clients. The Millers, who owned a chain of high-end retail stores, began closing locations. For the first time in decades, my neighbors were scared. The crash hit Evergreen Estates like a tsunami. By summer 2024, 3 of my neighbors had lost their jobs. The Johnsons' software company filed for bankruptcy. The Millers closed their last store. Luxury cars disappeared from driveways, replaced by more modest vehicles, or no vehicles at all, as some families downsized to 1 car. Landscaping services were canceled. Swimming pools sat untended. For the first time in decades, neighbors began to appear in their own yards, mowing their own lawns, washing their own cars. They looked shocked, as if they'd never imagined doing such tasks themselves. I continued my quiet routine, tending my garden, driving my old Toyota to the grocery store, living simply. But now neighbors avoided eye contact. I was a reminder of what they might become. The foreclosure notices began appearing in fall 2024. First the Andersons, then the Millers. The Johnsons held out longer, but by winter, their massive home had a notice too. Within 6 months, all 7 of the original homes surrounding mine had foreclosure notices. I watched with sadness, not joy. These were still people's lives falling apart. Families with children, with memories in these homes. Despite years of snubs and insults, I took no pleasure in their pain. But I did see an opportunity, not just a financial one, but a chance to rebuild our broken community. The county foreclosure auction was scheduled for April 15, 2025. I arrived early, dressed as I always did in simple, comfortable clothes. I noticed several of my neighbors huddled in the back of the room, looking devastated. They had come to witness the final chapter of their loss. None of them acknowledged me. Why would they? In their minds, I was just poor Margaret, probably there out of curiosity, or to see what modest home I might be able to afford now. The auction began with the Anderson property at 12 Lakeside Drive. The minimum bid was $450,000, about half its previous value but still substantial. Several property developers placed bids. When the bidding reached $600,000, I raised my hand. The auctioneer acknowledged me, and I saw my neighbors' heads turn in surprise. $650,000, I said clearly. A developer countered. $675,000. $700,000, I responded. After 2 more rounds, I secured the property for $780,000. I signed the required papers and returned to my seat. Next was the Miller property. Again, I entered the bidding war late and secured the property for $810,000. One by one, all 7 properties came up for auction. One by one, I purchased them, paying a total of $5.4 million in cashier's checks. As I completed the final paperwork, I finally allowed myself to look at my neighbors. Their expressions were a mixture of shock, confusion, and disbelief. Victoria Anderson's mouth literally hung open. David Johnson looked like he'd been slapped. Rebecca Miller approached me with trembling hands. "Margaret, how? I don't understand." I smiled gently. 40 years of living below my means, Rebecca. 40 years of smart investments. 40 years of ignoring what other people thought was important and focusing on what actually was. She shook her head, tears forming. "But what will you do with all these houses? You'll evict us all? Where will we go?" I took her hands in mine. "Let's go have coffee. We have a lot to talk about." I chose a simple cafe near the auction house. Gradually, all my former neighbors joined us, crowding around tables pushed together. 7 families, all looking shell-shocked, all waiting to hear their fate. "First," I began, "I want you to know that I'm worth approximately $8.2 million after today's purchases. I've been a CFO for 20 years. I paid off my mortgage in 1995. I own 3 rental properties downtown, and I chose to live simply because it aligned with my values, not because I had to." The silence was deafening. Sarah Johnson was the first to speak. "But, your car, your clothes." "My car has 300,000 miles on it and still runs perfectly. Why would I replace something that works? My clothes are comfortable and well-made. I spend money on quality, not labels." David Johnson looked down at his hands. "Why didn't you ever say anything? All these years we thought." "You thought what you wanted to think," I said simply. "You created a narrative about me based on appearances and never once asked about my story." Victoria Anderson wiped a tear. "So you bought our homes to get revenge? To finally show us up?" I shook my head. "No. I bought them because they were good investments and because I want to help rebuild our community, the real community we had before money and status took over." I opened my laptop and pulled up a document. "Here's what I'm proposing. Each of you can continue living in your homes under a lease-to-own arrangement. The monthly payment will be 25% less than your previous mortgage. Half of each payment will go toward eventually repurchasing your home, if you choose to. The lease terms are for 5 years, giving you time to rebuild your finances." Tyler Johnson looked suspicious. "What's the catch?" "The catch is that we're going to rebuild Evergreen Estates as a community. Monthly neighborhood meetings. A community garden on the empty lot at the end of the street. Regular potluck dinners where everyone contributes what they can. And a neighborhood fund to help anyone who faces unexpected hardships." I closed my laptop. "The homes you live in aren't what define you. It's how you treat others that matters." The first community meeting was awkward. People who had avoided me for years now sat in folding chairs in my backyard, sipping lemonade and avoiding eye contact. I kept the meeting simple, discussing plans for the community garden, organizing a schedule for neighborhood kids to help senior residents with yard work, planning the first potluck. Slowly, as weeks passed, things began to change. The massive gas-guzzling SUVs disappeared, replaced by practical vehicles. Ostentatious displays of wealth ended. No more competitions over who could throw the most lavish party or buy the most expensive holiday decorations. The community garden flourished. Neighbors who had previously hired others to do everything now discovered the satisfaction of growing their own vegetables. Children who had once been shuttled from one expensive activity to another now played together in yards and on sidewalks. The most profound changes were in the relationships. People began to see each other as equals, as human beings with value beyond their net worth. They shared skills. Rebecca Miller taught a neighborhood yoga class. David Johnson offered free coding lessons to interested teens. I gave financial literacy workshops. 6 months after the auction, we held a neighborhood picnic in the park at the center of Evergreen Estates. As I looked around at people laughing, sharing food, helping each other, I felt a deep satisfaction. Victoria Anderson sat down beside me on the bench. "I owe you an apology, Margaret," she said quietly. "For years, I judged you by what you didn't have instead of who you were. I missed out on knowing a remarkable person." I patted her hand. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them." She looked around at the community we were rebuilding. "You could have taken revenge. You could have evicted us all. Why didn't you?" I considered her question carefully. "Because revenge doesn't heal anything. It just creates more pain. I didn't want to win. I wanted us all to win together." 1 year after the auction, I invited everyone to my small blue house for tea. For many, it was the first time they'd been inside. They seemed surprised by the warm, cozy interior, the walls lined with bookshelves, the simple but beautiful furniture. "I want to share something with you," I said once everyone was settled with tea and homemade cookies. I distributed folders to each family. "Inside you'll find a financial plan customized for your situation. If you follow it, you'll be able to repurchase your homes within 5 years and still have savings for the future. You'll find that living with less can actually give you more freedom, more security, more peace." Sarah Johnson opened her folder with trembling hands. "You did this for all of us? After how we treated you?" "The past is past," I said simply. "We're neighbors. More than that, we're a community." That evening, as the last guest left, David Johnson lingered at the door. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I made millions with my company. I had the big house, the expensive cars, the luxury vacations. But I was always stressed, always working, always worried about losing it all." He looked around my modest living room. "And then I did lose it all, but I gained something more valuable, perspective. You've had that all along, haven't you?" I smiled. "It took me time to learn it too. We all find our way eventually." After he left, I sat on my porch swing, looking out at the neighborhood as dusk fell. Lights came on in windows. Children's laughter echoed from backyards. A genuine sense of community had replaced the superficial status competitions of the past. My simple blue house still stood unchanged among the larger homes. My old Toyota still sat in the driveway. I still wore the same comfortable clothes and lived by the same values. But everything else had changed. Not because I had bought 7 houses in a dramatic gesture, but because that moment had opened the door to honest conversations, to recognition of our shared humanity, to the rebuilding of real connections. The greatest wealth, I've learned over my 68 years, isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in dignity, in purpose, in relationships, in the respect we show each other. As night fell over Evergreen Estates, I felt truly rich in all the ways that matter. 5 years later, all 7 families had repurchased their homes, following the financial plans I created for them. The houses were simpler now. Some families had converted portions into rental units for additional income. Others had downsized by selling to smaller families and purchasing more modest homes nearby. The community we rebuilt remained strong. The garden expanded into a small farm that supplied fresh produce to a local food bank. The neighborhood fund had helped 3 families through medical emergencies without them falling into debt. My neighbors no longer saw me as poor Margaret. They saw me as I always was, a woman who made intentional choices, who valued financial freedom over status symbols, who understood that true wealth comes from within. On my 73rd birthday, the entire neighborhood gathered in the park. Tyler Johnson, now a teacher instead of a tech executive, presented me with a scrapbook filled with letters from everyone in Evergreen Estates. "You changed our lives," he said simply. "Not by buying our houses, but by showing us a better way to live. I still drive my old Toyota, though it's now vintage. I still live in my small blue house with its garden and porch swing. I still shop carefully and invest wisely. But now, when I walk through the neighborhood, people wave and call my name. Children stop to chat. Neighbors bring vegetables from gardens I helped them plant. I no longer feel like an outsider in my own community. I feel like what I always was, a person of value, regardless of appearances or possessions. The last laugh wasn't about proving my neighbors wrong or showing off my wealth. It was about creating something more valuable than money could ever buy, a community where every person is valued for who they are, not what they own. And that, more than any bank account balance, is the true measure of wealth.